Okay, everybody, welcome. Thank you for joining us this afternoon at The Journey Up with Chad Dickerson. We're super excited to have everybody here. I want to introduce myself. My name is Austin Bunn. I'm an associate professor here at Cornell and director of the Milstein Program in Technology and Humanity, which is the sponsor of today's talk. I just want to take a minute to explain what the Milstein Program is. It's now in its third year, and this unique undergraduate experience selects just 25 students a year from Cornell for specialized programming, just like this afternoon, to help develop innovative leaders, cross-disciplinary thinkers, and collaborators across a whole spectrum of fields in arts and sciences. Leaders who are both tech-savvy and steeped in humanistic values like empathy, curiosity, rigor, and reflection, which leads me to my guest today. We're so honored to have Chad here with us for this, what we're calling, I guess, a fireside chat. Is that right, Chad?
Yeah.
That was your tweet. Chad serves on the advisory board of the Milstein Program, but he also serves as a fellow at the Cornell Tech campus on Roosevelt Island, where he currently teaches in the Big Co studio curriculum track. We'll hear more about that later. But this track teaches students how to innovate successfully within the complex environment of a big company, hence the Big Co moniker. As to say, distinct from the startup culture. Is that right, Chad?
That's
what
right.
That's about?
Yeah.
So Chad now runs his own executive coaching practice, Strongback Open Heart, and that is in fact the URL, right? Strongbackopenheart.com. Mm-hmm. But you probably know him best as the CEO of Etsy.com from 2011 to 2017, where he took the company from the startup phase to a publicly traded company, and even referenced James Joyce and Ovid in a blog post the day that it went public. Over his tenure there, he led substantial organizational growth and change, including making it one of the best places to work for 4 years running. Prior to Etsy, Chad helped lead Yahoo's incubators and created the Yahoo Hack Day initiative, the first internal innovation program of its kind in a large company. It sounds a good bit like that's what ended up growing up into the Big Co studio curriculum track. Is that right, Chad?
Oh, yeah, there's definitely some influence there. Uh-huh.
He also served as a CTO for a variety of publications, including InfoWorld Media Group and Salon.com. He's also got an excellent blog. I really recommend you check it out, where he writes beautifully about the challenges of learning piano in his 40s, his commitment to seeing a Confederate monument in his hometown relocated, and the recent passing of his father. Chad holds a BA in English literature from Duke University, where he focused on the works of Shakespeare, what he calls the world's best writer on the challenges of leadership. So, thank you, Chad, for coming.
Great to be here.
Here's how this afternoon is going to work. So there are two parts to this. In the first part, Chad and you and I will have a conversation for about 25 minutes or so, and then we're going to open it up to audience questions. We'll wrap up this whole Q&A section by about 5:10 in the afternoon, so about an hour from now. Then at 5:20 p.m., we'll take a little break. At 5:20 p.m., we will inaugurate the Pitch Fest section of this, where Chad is going to listen to 6 short pitches from undergraduate entrepreneurs for original software applications and provide some constructive feedback. One of the 6 will win a $500 prize toward further development. Really excited to hear these pitches this afternoon. We got 30-some entries for you to consider, Chad, and they were all excellent. And then we'll wrap up this whole afternoon by about 6:20 p.m. So I should say to those of you who are listening, if you're interested in asking a question, feel free to pop the question into the chat, and I'll do my best to field it into the conversation. So, Chad, let's scroll back the clock a little bit to your undergraduate education. You got a number of students in the room today. So looking back, what were some of the lessons you took away from your liberal arts degree in English, or even your study of Shakespeare, that are still relevant to you now as a coach and as an executive?
Yeah, I think, first of all, just choosing that path was a lesson unto itself. And when I started my first year, one of the things I noticed in my dorm was there were so many people who had a plan. They were like, I'm going to major in biology, and then I'm going to be a doctor, and then I'm going to do my internship at this place. And at age 18, they had everything planned out all the way to like age 60, and I never have been oriented that way. So the fact that I was an English major honestly had a lot to do with, I really enjoyed English lit in high school. I really liked my English teachers a lot. And so I said, I'll major in English. I was like a lot of people who go into humanities. My dad was a civil engineer, my brother, computer engineer. They both went to NC State in North Carolina. I was the only one in my family to go to Duke. And, I wouldn't say pressure, but there was this idea that that's what you do to kind of go get a respectable job. Right. And, engineering is a great thing. But yeah, I chose literature because I was interested in it at the time. And, fast forwarding to today and we'll talk more about all this. I actually found that the humanities, the English degree became more and more valuable over time because, we live in a world, I didn't know this at the time, so I wasn't, prescient, but we live in a world that's largely driven on written communication, email, Medium posts, blogs, like all these sorts of things. And so I think, a lot of what I learned was, about critical thinking and writing. You mentioned Shakespeare, particularly. I think the reason we read Shakespeare, almost 500 years after those words are written, is that each play is such a character study that really aligns with today. So as a CEO, I would be in board meetings and people would be disagreeing or fighting or conniving or whatever, and I thought about Julius Caesar and Caesar talking about Cassius. I won't get the quote exactly right, but he says, Cassius has a lean and hungry look. I like fat men around me, people who are satisfied, like these hungry strivers. I don't know so much. And so I thought about, and I'm not just making this up, I thought about particular Shakespeare scenes when I was dealing with things in business, because those stories are so iconic and so much about human nature and politics and, all that stuff, that it was just really, universal, I guess is the best word. And so I'm so happy that I majored in English.
You've talked about even showing up for coaching sessions with tickets to Henry IV in your pocket to give to executives to think about the burden of leadership and what it means to be a target, a source of inspiration. So it's funny how it's still with you.
Yeah. I mean, in my, final days at Etsy, and, it's the stories out there, Etsy, my time at Etsy didn't end the way I wanted. I was asked to leave. I didn't leave on my own, but, probably, I think weeks before all of that happened, I saw Henry IV at St. Anne's Warehouse, which is a theater in Brooklyn that I'm on the board of. And there was so much on my mind during that time. There was a lot happening. We were public and struggling in various ways. But, the title character, Henry IV, comes out on his balcony, and it's in the middle of the night. And he talks about how, he's the king, yet all of his subjects are sleeping soundly, and he, the one who runs the kingdom and has all the power, is the one who's awake,
sleepless. Yeah.
And there's that famous quote from that one, which I think it's uneasy lies the head that wears the crown. And I was sitting in the audience with chills because I was having plenty of sleepless nights around that time.
We're going to get into that in a little bit. Yeah. So having graduated with an English degree, you eventually pivot into more engineering and working in the tech side, the engineering side of some publications. Can you talk about that middle game, how you went from that undergraduate degree to starting to move up through these publications? Yeah.
So, I finished Duke and got my undergraduate in English, and, I was 21, and honestly, I really, really enjoyed the program I went through, and I, read so many great works, Shakespeare and Joyce and, Faulkner and all kinds of folks, authors. But I still didn't know exactly what I was going to do. I think one of the challenges with an English degree is it doesn't necessarily directly translate into a specific vocation. So you have to be a little more creative. Do I want to be a journalist? Do I want to be a technical writer? All sorts of things. And so I still wasn't sure what I wanted to do. So, I did two things. I got a job because I loved working in the media, and I loved reading media. I was kind of a news junkie my whole life. I started reading the newspaper when I was 5 years old, reading cover to cover every day. I went to work at the newspaper in Raleigh, North Carolina, called the News and Observer, which is, if you don't live in North Carolina, it's probably not that remarkable. But the News and Observer happened to be, and this was in December 1993, News Observer happened to be the first daily newspaper on the web in the United States.
Really?
And so I took a job basically doing clerical work, like filing papers and running errands and that kind of thing. It wasn't even a technical job, but the room that I was doing all that work in was the room where they were building websites. So I started asking my coworkers, who are really very generous people, like, what are you doing there? And they started explaining, like, we're building databases. And I was like, what's that? And so I started asking a lot of questions, and eventually there's a man named Dan Woods, still a good friend of mine. He said, this is pretty easy. And he showed me some stuff. And the next thing I knew, I was reading SQL books, and I was writing code and building like web pages and all that kind of stuff. And so basically I almost forgot about this, but some of my job that I was doing was very manual. And as I learned coding, I like automated my job. And so the 8 hours that I normally would have been doing everything manually, I would like run a program and, you know, maybe debug it for 30 minutes. And then for the next 7.5 hours, I would go sit with the web team and learn, you know, take on tasks. So I was getting paid like $7 an hour, but teaching myself how to code. That I said I did two things. The second thing, because I was making, you know, $7 an hour and I wasn't like independently wealthy or supported by my parents. Second thing is I got a job delivering pizza. And so the pizza job and the newspaper job both were low paying, but together, like, I was able to cover my rent in North Carolina. But in, you know, the December 1993 through like, you know, January 94 and beyond, you would have found me doing two things, like learning to code and showing up on people's doorsteps with a pizza. So
you learned something about retail and customer satisfaction, I guess.
Yeah, you did. And, you know, riding around, you know, all over North Raleigh where I was delivering, I listened to a lot of good music and that kind of thing. So the News and Observer was really kind of the launching pad for the tech work I did. And it looks obvious in retrospect, but when you realize that I just walked in and took a clerical job that had nothing to do with journalism or the web, it really reminds me that so much of what happens in life, and this happened to me many times, is like being in the right place at the right time. Yeah. And being very open to what's around you. Cause I could have just as easily just kept filing and ignored everything that was happening around me. But, I saw what was happening and I asked a lot of questions, and, you know, really importantly, and I think the people in the audience who are thinking about like their careers, I think that you can depend on a lot of generosity from other people. And I mean, the idea that I was in this group of people as a kind of a file boy, and I asked them how to code, and they like helped teach me as part of their job. You know, that taught me also that when I'm in a workplace, not to be too annoying, but to really take advantage of the people around you, because people are really helpful and they like to, you know, to help young people and give them advice and all that. So I took full advantage of that.
Yeah, I mean, scrolling forward, maybe in your professional biography, I had some other questions, but since you're on this topic, you're obviously somebody really interested in invested in corporate culture and thinking about how to install values in a place. And I know, thinking about your time at Etsy, it's a company that ends up getting deemed best place to work and certified as a B corporation, which is a way of realigning the values of a corporation to include not just the shareholders, but stakeholders, so the environment or the employees themselves. How do you install those kinds of cultural values in a business? It seems like it would be next to impossible. What are some of the techniques that you've used to help build those value systems, like you were saying, generosity of spirit and invitational atmosphere? Yeah.
I mean, I think for me, it kind of starts honestly with like what attracted me to companies. And so when I started working at the newspaper, even though it was a filing job that turned into something more than that, you know, I grew up you know, reading a lot of like political stuff. I read, you know, All the President's Men about Watergate, and, you know, I really admired Woodward and Bernstein. And I had this this image of, journalists running through the newsroom with the story and, breaking news and truth to power and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
So the reason I wanted to work at a newspaper was, newspapers are not places to go if you want to make a lot of money, like even then, especially not now.
Yeah.
But I really kind of believed in the mission of like news and media. So I think you have to have a company that I think has kind of a soul and a sense of meaning. And so what I always tried to do when I became a leader, like, to use Etsy as an example, the thing that I loved the most about Etsy, it was obviously a business, but like it was this, and still is, like a huge collection of creative people. So when I talked to the customers of Etsy, whether it was like the buyers or the sellers, but especially the sellers, there's these amazing people who like really believed in creating and, making things by hand. And there were a lot of crafts that were very local to where people were. And so, I think at Etsy, we were able to connect that sense of meaning and creation and creativity to the way people felt about working there. So, there was a real sense that, helping artisans run their own businesses and set their own hours and do things that they love to make money, was a really wonderful thing to do. And the fact that, something that blew me away, because I grew up in North Carolina. I didn't by the time I was 26, I'd taken 2 flights. Like being on a plane was like a big deal.
Wow. Okay.
And then I ended up going all over the world with Etsy and everything. But, Etsy was also very global. So, I would talk to sellers from Italy, from, Russia, the UK, Canada, South America. And there was a real like universality to, how people thought about making things and the pride in what they do. And so I think that, that kind of thinking really, when the business has values in it, like what the business does, then I think it's, as a leader, all you have to do, and it's not easy, but is kind of capture that spirit and, talk about it inside the walls. So we, at Etsy, we spent a lot of time talking about sellers, bringing sellers in, like, and we're very connected to so we felt, I always felt like we were really, kind of servant leaders to that group of people. And I think that gave people a very, very much a sense that, it was about values and kind of doing the right thing.
Thinking about values, you write about on your blog about walking in the door at Etsy as a CTO. Now, this is having spent some time.
Yeah.
We talked about the CNN, Atlanta Journal-Constitution, and Salon.com, moving your way up. You come in at Etsy and you actually write an article about the need for intellectual honesty in the developers and in the engineering side. Can you talk more about what that means to you and why it was necessary?
Yeah, and to preface what I'm about to say, like, I think any group of people who build a startup, it's just messy and there's like a 99% chance that you're never going to go anywhere. And so you make technical choices just to get to the next day and stuff like that. But by the time I came to Etsy, it was about 2 years and 9 months after Etsy started. And in the kind of like hockey stick that everyone talks about, it was like way at the bottom.
Okay.
It was just getting started. You never know that.
50 people or something, right?
Yeah, it was about 50 people. And so, over that 2 years and 9 months, the team had built a lot of momentum, the founding team, but, it was starting to get messy, like things were starting to break. And, that when it was announced I was hired as CTO, this was in the very early days of Twitter, but, Twitter was starting to get critical mass too. I immediately started getting requests from Etsy sellers to there almost weren't requests. It was like lists of demands. Like, here are the 10 things that you need to do.
Okay.
And so, when I walked in, the infrastructure was really, was in rough shape. One of my strongest memories is my first week. I was recruiting an engineer. I'd taken him out to a bar in Brooklyn, kind of near Etsy headquarters, and my phone was blowing up because the site was down completely. And so, my first week, the site was down. The site was down for an hour, which in internet time is like a year. But again, like the team who started Etsy, I was fortunate to come along later, like built the kernel of something that was really great. And, I think my job at that time was to really, take the knowledge I had working at like bigger companies. I'd come from Yahoo to sort of help shepherd at that time, because I was CTO, not CEO yet, the technology into the place where it needed to be to like really grow the community. And, I had a lot of, it's not a cliche, I had a lot of sleepless nights. Like I slept with my phone by the bed for like a year and a half, and it rang a lot. It wasn't just sitting there.
Wow.
And we had late night conference calls to fix stuff. But the thing that always motivated me again was like the seller community. Like people depended on us to make money, and the sellers I met were just like, and still do, like the coolest people. So that was super motivating. But over the course of about a year and a half, we started to get a lot of momentum on the technology side, and we went from like a really super struggling infrastructure to bringing on some really great talent and becoming a model for certain kinds of engineering. We were pioneers in something called continuous deployment. And
what is that? Just constantly
it's
redeploying.
one of those things that's become
software?
a lot more commonplace, but it means basically deploying code, small changes very frequently. So we were at the time, I think, deploying the site like 50 or 60 times a day. And this has changed a lot, but back then there were sites that would make all their changes like every 2 weeks. So we were making thousands of changes. But so that was a really difficult period because the infrastructure and everything was in a difficult place. But we really kind of worked and powered through. And a lot of companies go through this. Twitter in its early days, there was something called the fail whale, depending on the ages of the people watching this, but it was what you would get when the site wasn't working. And it was, a lot of challenges. And so I think a lot of companies go through a period where, from a technology perspective, they hit like a scale point that they have a hard time getting past. And that's where we were.
You moved from the hockey sticky part of the hockey stick to the actual, like the face of the end part, whatever the other part of a hockey stick is. So in 2011, you become the CEO of Etsy. Huge step. And you immediately reach out to a corporate coach, Jerry Colonna, who became your mentor. Can you talk a little bit about why you decided to reach out to a corporate coach and what exactly what did you need help with?
Yeah. I mean, I would like to say that it was like a profound moment of, deep introspection, but basically what happened is Fred Wilson, who's a really well-known venture capitalist and early investor in Etsy, mentioned when the board, we had a conversation about me becoming CEO. He said, like a friend of mine is a really good coach. Do you want to talk to him? And I didn't even know what a coach was, but I thought if someone's going to offer something to me, I'll take it. And so I met Jerry, I think in the first week, and, Jerry and I worked together for, the entire 6 years. And, what I learned from coaching, and as you mentioned, I'm a coach now, I've been doing that for about 3 years, is that when you're a leader in a company, especially a CEO, there often isn't another person that you can speak with without any reservations or any concern. Like you can talk to your board of directors, but there's always a little bit of a political angle to that. You can talk to your executive team. There's always a little bit of calculation about like what you share and what you don't share. And so on a really basic level, a coach is someone you can completely bear all with and say anything, including like, I don't want to do this job anymore, or
right.
I don't know why I'm here. Like you could imagine if you said that to your board or your executive team, that's like difficult for people to handle in those contexts sometimes. So yeah, I met with Jerry pretty much every week for that 6 years. And, not just through business stuff. I mean, we're all kind of whole people. So during that period, my wife and I adopted a son, I became a father. We went through all kinds of crazy stuff, going from startup to going public. And, Jerry was, and still is, like a really important presence in my life.
Gotcha. So we'll start taking questions from the audience now as we move to the latter part of the Q&A. So interesting, actually, to think about that relationship building. And now that you're a corporate coach yourself, and just reflecting for a moment, Chad, what do you think about, what are those sort of influential people, or in this case, we've got a question, what book did you read that may have influenced your personal philosophy when you think about your own growth and your own trajectory? Who mattered to you, either as authors or as human beings?
Yeah, I think, we talked about Jerry. You mentioned I lost my father this year, which was difficult. We had a really good relationship. So, I don't have any regrets there. I mentioned him because I feel like my dad taught me a lot. And so, and when you're 20, 25, you hear this, like you don't appreciate it until much later. But a lot of things I learned in business, I actually learned from my dad, even though he was, for most of my life, he worked for the government, like he wasn't an entrepreneur. But just to give you an example, like, and I actually found this note that he had written to me just a few months ago. My brother and I ran a lawn mowing business when we were kids, and it was a big lawn mowing business. Like we mowed probably 25 or 30 lawns a week.
Wow. Okay.
And just to give you a sense of what I learned from my dad is, our business started scaling up. We had 2 lawns and maybe 3. And then we decided like we could scale up and buy a riding lawnmower, not just use the push lawnmower.
Right.
And so we went to my dad and we said, can you buy us a lawnmower? And he said, no, but I could loan you the money to buy a lawnmower. And so long story short, my dad wrote up like an amortization schedule and loaned us the money and said, okay, you can pay me back over 24 months. You can pay me, X dollars a month. And,
no interest?
Well, he told me he was going to charge like prime plus 2.
Okay.
And I was 10 years old and I was like, what is prime? And he said, go look in the newspaper. It's published there every day.
Okay.
And so, so my dad like taught me the value of like investing money and, how to scale a business by, smart capital allocation and smart borrowing and that kind of thing. So, I think there are things that you learn from your parents and those around you who maybe aren't even famous or, notable that kind of stick with you. My dad also
made
me start paying taxes when I was like 8 years old. So I learned about taxes and, by the time I was, 18, I'd done my taxes, like a dozen times almost. So, so that, and I think someone who a lot of people had never heard of even when he was alive, the company IDG, which was the parent company for InfoWorld. I worked there from 2001, 2005. The chairman there was Pat McGovern, and Pat passed away probably 5 years ago, but Pat owned all of IDG. It was the world's largest tech publishing company at the time. And he published some of the first computer magazines, like in the late 1960s. So he knew Bill Gates when Microsoft was starting. Like Steve Jobs would call him up and say, hey, I'm building the Mac. Like he was that kind of guy. The brain research at MIT is endowed by him. So it's like the Pat McGovern brain research at MIT. And so Pat, privately held, but the company was super successful. And for the entire time Pat owned the company, and this is from, 1970, before I was born, all the way until I think he stepped down probably 2010. So, 40 years, every year. And this is a global company, like China, Europe, like everywhere. Pat would visit every office and would go around with the CEO of the business unit and the manager of each person and talk to them about like what they had done that year. And, this was kind of pre-scripted, like he was given information, but he had a very specific comment about every person. And so I think there were like 3,000 employees at the time.
Okay.
And so he would do that every year. And then very occasionally he had some letterhead that had this rainbow and it said good news on it.
Okay.
It looked very 1970s, but
Okay.
he would write a handwritten letter occasionally and sign it with something that he noticed you were doing. And so I was a columnist for InfoWorld magazine when I was there. And there were a couple columns I wrote, and Pat read the column and wrote a note saying, I really like what you had to say. And so I think that, from Pat, I learned the kind of value of trying to be connected to everyone and, being generous and thoughtful.
Fantastic.
Really great man.
We've got a number of questions coming in, but just to touch back on this question of books that you read that may have been influential. Yeah. I know Jerry Colonna wrote a book too called Reboot. You recommend it?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's chapter 2 has a story about me in it.
Right, the day you were fired, and maybe we'll get back there. So here are a couple questions. Someone's asking, how do you rate the future of B Labs and the B certification? Bullish, bearish? Will another social enterprise certification win out, or will B Labs be the winner globally?
So I know the B Lab people really, really well, and Etsy was a B Corp. I'm actually very bullish on B Lab. Eventually, Etsy ultimately did not convert to being a benefit corporation. I won't get into all the technical stuff because I think it would take up a lot of time. But we became a B Corp in 2012, and we had raised a lot of money, and I think we were probably like 70% owned by venture capital at that time. And so the challenge we had at Etsy, and a lot of companies had in the early days of B Corp or benefit corporations, is like, do you convert to a benefit corporation or not? They see you go from like, Etsy Inc. to Etsy PBC, Public Benefit Corporation.
Okay.
And it's a whole process, and it's fairly difficult for like a late stage company. But the reason I'm bullish is that as companies like Etsy and Kickstarter and Warby Parker kind of brought attention to B Lab and B Corp in 2012 timeframe, more and more entrepreneurs who had not started companies yet started paying attention, and so they were able to start their companies as benefit corporations, not worrying about converting all the for-profit shareholders to benefit corporations. And benefit corporations still a for-profit entity. And so in the past year or so, you're starting to see companies that are benefit corporations going public on the public market. So one that is like Lemonade, the insurance company, multi-billion-dollar company, and it's a B Corp, and they're doing quite well. Last I looked, companies like Allbirds, who make the shoes, are B Corp. So I think in the time when Etsy became B Corp in 2012, it was kind of like an unusual thing, and investors were like, I don't really know what to make of this. It's become very mainstream in a really important way. And frankly, I think a lot of what we've seen over the past couple of years with companies from Nike to others getting involved in various social justice initiatives, I think it's become a very mainstream idea that companies have positions on social issues. And so in 2012, even though it wasn't that long ago, it was like a little bit weird to be a B Corp. They're like, wait a second, are you a nonprofit or are you whatever?
Right.
But now I think there are a lot of really, really great models. I think very, very, very bullish.
Fantastic. Someone's asking about coaching and how you find a coach. So for those who are listening who maybe are interested in working with a coach, how do you identify them? Is there a good resource? What do you look for in one coach too?
It's actually pretty difficult because it's very distributed. Like even my business, I run it myself. Like I'm not part of any association. There's a coach, Steve Schlafman, who is a good coach in his own right, but he wrote a guide to finding an executive coach. And I think it's a really great articulation of like what coaching is, how to find a coach. I just recommended it to someone this week, and he has a couple slides in the deck about like who are great coaches. So there's some names in there.
Okay, fantastic. How do you spell his last name?
Schlafman, I think.
Okay. Schlafman.
Steve Schlafman, like how to find an executive coach. And it's a great guide. I haven't seen anything even close to it.
I know as a corporate coach, I have this quote that you wrote, which was, I made my share of mistakes as a leader, and I think my reflections on those mistakes have helped me become a more effective coach.
Yeah.
So I just thought I'd ask, like, what were some of those mistakes that you would make all over again, if only because it helped you become a more effective coach? Are there specific stories you tell clients about decisions you made that the recovery or the way in which you had to respond taught you a lot about your own leadership?
Well, I think so much, especially in kind of knowledge businesses, software businesses, so much of your success or difficulty comes from kind of human capital, like who's on the team, how people are doing, developing talent, and that sort of thing. So one of the, and this is a very common challenge, by the way, one of the challenges that leaders have, because I think most CEOs are optimistic, like it's a difficult job. So you have to be optimistic to kind of get up in the morning and like believe that you can do it. That optimism often extends to people. So a lot of times leaders have trouble when they have someone on the team who's not working out, letting them go or putting them in a position that's going to work better. And so, I made a number of mistakes in that area. And so I would say a pretty big topic in my coaching sessions is about, bringing on the right talent, but also kind of weeding out the talent that's not working out. So I spend a lot of time, encouraging, like if a CEO comes to me 3 sessions in a row and I meet them, every 2 weeks, that's like a 6-week period. And they say, my VP of engineering is really failing or my CMO is really failing. I always ask them, like, have you been giving the person feedback? Because I think that's what you're supposed to do. But, I say, like, there were times that I held on to someone too long and, I should have made a decision and, like, brought in someone new. And, I tell them some of those stories. And as a coach, you try to be supportive, but also push. And I say, for 6 weeks, you've been telling me that one of your key executives is not working out. Like, what are you going to do about it? And it's difficult. Like, it's always difficult. But I think, when someone's not doing well, again, you should always give them feedback and make sure they understand they're not doing well. But if they continue to not do well, it's actually the compassionate thing to do to, tell them it's not working out. And so I struggle with that. And I know a lot of my clients struggle with that. It's probably the most common challenge.
It's really interesting diving into this question of your relationship to your clients and your clients' relationships to their employees. Tatiana, one of the participants, is asking, how do you know when to just ask questions of your clients and help them versus when to suggest the answers and guide them to a solution? Do you find yourself almost as a therapist really just letting them solve their own problems, or do you feel like you do have discrete observations and guidance to give?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think that, like, coaching is 95% asking questions. And I actually try really hard not to tell people what they should be doing. And I learned this from Jerry. Jerry's kind of an expert questioner. But one of the things in my early days of coaching, because I was so intently focused on not trying to provide solutions and only asking questions, I noticed a pattern in my clients. They were kind of like, hey, like, these are good questions, but, like, I want to hear a little bit more about, like, what you experienced. And I talked to Jerry about this. Jerry was still co-coaching me, and Jerry said, yeah, like, it's okay. Like, don't overcorrect on not sharing your experience and just purely questioning. So I would say it's kind of a mix. And so, occasionally something comes up and I say, like, I'm just a warning here, like, I'm going to shift out of coach mode for a second and I'm going to, like, put on my CEO hat and tell you what I think, because it's, I'm, like, so biased on this thing.
I see.
And that has a coaching effect because you're putting on the table, like, your own bias and like explaining. So occasionally something will happen. This is a somewhat mundane example, but I've had a couple of clients say, did you ever do anything about, like, a dog policy in the office when you were running Etsy? And I won't bore everyone with this story, but, like, I did a lot around dog policies and learned a lot.
Okay.
And so I would say, look, like, here's what's going to happen. if you do this.
If you do a dog policy. Okay.
Yeah.
What's going to happen, Chad? Dog fights?
Well, there's a great episode of Silicon Valley, the HBO show.
Yeah.
Where Pied Piper buys another company, or they merge together, and one company allows dogs and one doesn't. I would just encourage people to find that episode.
Okay. To find out what happens.
Because it's basically a movie of everything I went through around like Etsy's dog policy.
I know you've written about, and I know Jerry Colonna has written about this core question that you often ask your clients to help elicit more reflection about where their company's going and maybe why they're not happy with where they are. And it's, how am I complicit in creating the conditions I say I don't want? How am I complicit in creating the conditions I say I don't want? So how would you have answered that? I mean, it sounds like it would have been something around acknowledging your team's strengths and potentially limitations, trying to figure out the right position for the talent you have. How else do you answer that question? It's a interestingly reflective one, right? It sort of says you're responsible for the life that you're living and the corporate situation you have.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I haven't thought about that in a while.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, I would say, like, there were times when I was a leader that, I wanted people to like be more aggressive and, really bear down and like get something done and, that sort of thing. I think at times, as a person, I could be a little bit too open to like, I mean, this sounds a little bit silly when I say it out loud, but I think sometimes I got too involved with like how people were feeling about certain things. And so because I did really care about people, but that could cause me to like lose sight of what we were trying to do because I was trying to make someone happy or trying to make someone not sad or like whatever. And so I think, my complicity was, in those times when I would talk to someone like Jerry's like, God, I wish people would really bear down. Like my sort of complicit act was like engaging people on secondary and tertiary issues sometimes and losing that focus. So I think that's one example. An example that comes up with my coaching clients, like, and the idea of urgency, I think always comes up when you're talking to CEOs. Right. A CEO will come to me and I do 360s on CEOs, which means, you interview everyone on the team and you write a report about how this person is succeeding and not succeeding and that kind of thing. And so a fairly common thing is a CEO will come to me and say like, people aren't hitting deadlines in the company and it drives me crazy. And like, I need a sense of urgency in the company. And I'll say, hey, like, I hear you, but I did your 360 and everybody says that you're late to every meeting. And so you're basically, by example, you're showing people it's okay not to be on time. So if you really want to create, tight accountability for the company, then you have to have tight accountability for yourself. So when you say you're going to deliver something to someone on the team by 5 p.m. on Tuesday, it's got to be done by 5 p.m. on Tuesday.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of thing. The complicity is often you're doing the thing that you don't want other people to do.
Right. Chad, you've written that the experience of being fired as the CEO of Etsy was not fun, but quote, truly meaningful learning experience. And I thought that was really beautiful, really touching. And we've had some questions about what were some of the lessons of moving on and putting Etsy in the rear view.
Yeah. Yeah, I think first of all, the experience itself, like even though I said, my first job out of Duke was like working at Pizza Hut, if I were to like graph my life, it was just like up, 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 up. It was like rocket ship, rocket ship, rocket ship, rocket ship. And so I think that like I'd never like come down and dealt with, defeat on a professional basis. It was mostly like all success. And so, I, as a leader, I've had to let a lot of people go. And like, I've always tried to do it as best as I can. But like, now that I've been on the other end of that, like I look back at some of the, terminations that I've done. I was like, like I should have handled that differently. Like now I know how it feels. And so, that was, really profound in a lot of ways. The other thing I learned is that, you know, when you're in a position like CEO of Etsy, like you get a lot of attention, and, you know, you like go on TV and like you're in magazines. And I played poker with like Shaquille O'Neal, and like I met President Obama, and like I did all this stuff, and it was really kind of thrilling at the time. But, you know, when my time there was over, like all of that kind of like disappeared. And I realized like who the really important people were in my life, and the kind of like pursuit of notoriety and fame, and like, you know, even, you know, wanting to get a bunch of likes on Instagram and all that kind of stuff. I think it's kind of this like relentless, endless pursuit where you'll never be satisfied. And so, you know, I've been away from Etsy for 3 years. What I've been trying to do is really focus on things that make me happy, not things that like make me look good. And it's a subtle distinction. And so I think, you know, I have an ego like everyone else. Like I want people to think I'm cool and great and all that kind of stuff. But I've just really like shifted my life more towards kind of inner satisfaction.
Yeah.
So even for this talk that we're doing right now, like a couple of people are like, wow, I haven't heard from you in a really long time. It's like, I just don't do much of this because I'm not, it's a really great thing. I'm not like seeking notoriety. And so right after I left Etsy and I would talk to Jerry, one of the things that I would say to him is like, I had this sense of loss. Like I wasn't part of the mix anymore. Like I wasn't getting invited to whatever. And I was like, yeah, I want that feeling of like being in the game. And Jerry was like, you know, just take a break. Like, you know, if you can take some time and really think about it. And so I've kind of like mostly gotten rid of that feeling. And it's a really wonderful thing. I think it's, you know, intrinsic motivation versus extrinsic, you know, doing it for yourself versus like external rewards. And so I've shifted it. It was probably like 50-50 before, and now it's probably like 90% intrinsic.
Intrinsic.
Yeah.
Chad, we've got like 10 more minutes of the Q&A. Yeah. There's some more questions coming in. But on this topic specifically, you've written really beautifully about learning to play piano and the frustrations that are involved in that, and also the vulnerability it takes to be a beginner at our age. So can you talk a little bit about that intrinsic motivation quality, and what has practicing something challenging taught you? And are there any ways that you've imagined that might be useful in your coaching, or the way that you talk to CEOs about what does it mean to make yourself vulnerable or to do something you're not good at? Just talk about that.
Yeah. So, you know, I would start by saying that I think everybody has some, I don't know what you would call dreams. Like, you know, one day I'm going to write a novel, one day I'm going to be in a band, or like one day I'm going to learn how to play the flute, you know, whatever. And
in the band that you write the novel about.
It's almost like that novel, The Secret Life of Walter Mitty. Like Walter Mitty was always dreaming about but he wasn't living in his current existence.
Right.
And so one of the things, I've played really sloppy guitar for like 25 years. And I mean, really sloppy, not very good.
Okay.
And I've always been very interested in music. And, you know, I really wanted to learn music, not just piano. And so I decided to take piano. And when you talk to people, I'm 48 years old, like, they're like, wow, that's great. That's so cool. Because a lot of people carry around this fantasy, but it's just really hard work. And so I had to find a piano teacher. It was at a place here in Brooklyn, like in my neighborhood. And the piano teacher I had, I would sit outside this booth, and the prior student would leave before I would come in. And the prior student was a 6-year-old girl. There would be like,
in her practice.
Yeah, exactly. So there'd be like glitter and like stickers like from the girl, and like pencils with like unicorns and horses on them. And then I would sit down with this teacher, and I would be no better and probably worse than the 6-year-old. And so I went from, you know, an accomplished CEO, like took a company public, did all the stuff in my career. And it's almost hard to articulate, but to be sitting at a piano bench with someone who's just taught a 6-year-old girl who's better than you are, And to just get started on that, like it's a very vulnerable feeling, like you mentioned, vulnerability. And so the weird thing, I don't even remember how I came up with this, but I decided when I started piano lessons that no matter what happened, I was going to do piano lessons for a year. And if I really didn't like it after a year, then I would stop, but I would do it for a year, and I would do it without any judgment of how I was doing. And so, first 3 or 4 months, just terrible.
I've heard some of it on SoundCloud. It is available on SoundCloud for those who are interested, right? You've gone public.
Yeah.
I'll put it in the chat.
Instructional, like in the sense of like, here's what you can play after like 6 months. But, what I learned, 2 things: that if you're vulnerable, you can learn anything, but it's especially hard to be a 48-year-old man who used to be a CEO and like walk in after a 6-year-old girl clear the glitter off the bench and like get down to work. So that was one thing. And then the other thing I learned is the value of process and appreciating the process. So what allowed me to take lessons for that year, I've been doing it for 18 months now, is that I taught myself to enjoy the process of practicing. And, the early days, it's like Yankee Doodle. You're playing something that's so simple. And I was like, okay, this is cool. Like I couldn't play Yankee Doodle last week. Now I can play Yankee Doodle. But just appreciating the process. And so now I probably spend, 4 or 5 hours a week just on piano. And I've learned a lot about music. And it's a really great part of my life. So I would encourage anyone to like move on from that dream of like what you might do one day and think about how to actually do it. And you don't have to be 48. You can be 21. Don't give up the things that you really want to do. But it's real work. I mean, I spent 4 or 5 hours a week, and it's mostly sitting by myself, like playing the same thing over and over again until I get it right. It's not like people are standing around a piano singing, songs with me.
Right.
It's very, very solitary.
Chad, for a moment, imagine you're going to form a new company and you're going to start hiring people. What kinds of things are you looking for in those folks that you might bring on board? I think about there's some business book that I've read about using Ernest Shackleton as a model and how you do a polar expedition, and his whole credo was to hire optimists. And I wondered, for you, what kind of values would you be looking for in the people you might bring on board? The questions are coming in, for example, should students be, if they are liberal arts majors, should they be studying technology and business? Is that something you'd be looking for in some, obviously CTO, you'd need something like that, but just for those people who are first making their way up into a company, what values do they need?
Well, I think for whatever reason, there has been an artificial sort of dissection of like the paths you can go. There's like math and science or humanities, and they're talked about as if they're 2 different lanes, never to meet. I think it's getting a little better, but that's a conversation I'm sure still happens in people's homes today. Like, do you want to be an engineer? And like parents are like, yes. Do you want to be an English major? Like maybe no. We definitely had that conversation because it's people are thinking about like vocations and that kind of thing. So I think that's artificial. And I would point people, I'm surprised people don't talk about this all the time, but Steve Jobs said about Apple, I won't get the quote exactly right, but he said basically Apple is an amazing company and creates amazing products because it's the fusion of technology and liberal arts. And he used the phrase liberal arts. Like I know that's correct. And so I think in a world where technology is pervasive, where everyone is using technology, the people who are creating technology have to ultimately be like humanistic people. Because, back in the day when you were building, in the 1950s, missile control systems for the military, then your customer was someone who knew how to run missile control systems. Now with everyone having a smartphone and doing so many things online, your customer is everyone. And so, everything we did at Etsy and like the companies I work with, a lot of the work that you do is like user research, talking to people, how they use things. And, I think the liberal arts is such an important part of that. So I think if I was 20 years old and I went back to school and I had a very liberal arts track, I took 2 science classes and no math classes. I would probably have taken a blend. Like I would have double majored in English and computer science. And so I think the combination of it's not either or, but the combination of those things is really what people need. And I think about someone I worked with at Yahoo, Stuart Butterfield, who's the CEO of Slack. Like Stuart, I think was a philosophy major. And if you ever get the chance to talk to someone like Stuart, like he's, very computer savvy, obviously, but he's also knows like history and philosophy and all those sorts of things. So I think the complexity of the world we live in today demands that. I mean, when you look at, and think about like what's happening with the election, with like disinformation and Facebook and Twitter, like those aren't computer science questions exclusively. They're also political science questions, history questions, sociology questions.
Right.
And I would love to have developers who double majored or triple majored in like all of those things, working on that kind of problem.
Okay. So Chad, we just have a few minutes left. I thought we would just do a little speed round. We've got some questions we didn't get to, so I'm going to pose them. You knock them out of the field. Okay. So is Katerina Fake still known as the most active female angel investor in New York City?
I actually don't know. I mean, she's mostly, I think, investing in the Bay Area, but I think she's pretty global. Okay. So yeah, she's great regardless.
Good to know.
Of where she
how do you integrate mental health into your coaching? Do you ever work with a partner or a provider, like a social worker or a therapist yourself?
So I'm not a therapist, and I don't pretend to be a therapist with my clients, but one of the things that Jerry taught me is if you're going to be a coach, like you really need to do the work yourself. So I go to therapy every 2 weeks myself. Okay. I consider it a really and my therapist tells me like most of the time I go into therapy, I'm like, I'm totally happy. Everything's great. And she says, it's okay to come to therapy when you're happy.
Oh, okay.
And so I think it is part of what kind of keeps you happy. So, I think to generalize a little bit, I think it's really important, whatever stage you are in your life, to build a support system. And so for executives, it might be a coach, a therapist, a peer group of other CEOs. But even when you're in college, just starting out, I think maybe it's other people in your program, maybe it's your parents. But, when I was younger, I probably didn't ask for help when I needed it as much. I tried to figure everything out. And so I would encourage everyone in whatever form just to ask for help, because most people, I think, are very generous.
Right. Okay. And last question. Someone asked about your thoughts on the arts and the technological impacts and growth of the various areas of art, music, writing, creativity. I know, for example, what are you excited about in those areas? I know you've written about using Logic to collaborate with friends to make music. Other ideas the areas that are kind of interesting to you in the arts?
Yeah. I mean, I think arts and technology just are almost like perfectly fused now. And when I think about Etsy, like the interesting thing to me about Etsy is what you saw on Etsy has been happening for thousands of years. It like probably predates speech, but technology allowed people all over the world to kind of link together around the idea of, artisanship and craft. And so I think, whether it's music, you mentioned like a friend and I like trade Logic tracks, and sort of collaborate with each other. Music all the technology allows you to collaborate in ways that you could never do before. All the museums are online. So, even if you don't live and, we all can't really travel right now, you can still experience, art and beauty. So I think, technology is essential. Like it's really exciting. And like, I'm obviously a music fan, but I feel like I've been able to discover more artists like on SoundCloud and Spotify and YouTube than I ever would have any other way.
Okay. Fantastic, Chad. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. We're only halfway done. I want to make a quick announcement before we take a break, which is next week, we're going to have another guest speaking via the Milstein Program. Her name is Courtney Coburn, and in fact, she is a VR social worker who has designed this VR experience called the 1,000 Cut Journey, which is an attempt to use virtual reality to fight racism. And if you'd like to come hear from her, she teaches at Columbia in the social work program, but she'll be on Zoom next Wednesday, 4:15 to 5:15. We're encouraging anyone who's present right now to attend. Registration is required, and it's via that website listed on the screen. So it's 5:15. Chad, we're going to take a 5-minute break. And then we will begin Pitch Fest. So this means the students who are here who are pitching, get ready. You guys, that would be COVID SMS is first before we hear from it. So we'll take 5 minutes and we will regroup. Feel free to take a bathroom break, and we'll see you back in 5 minutes.
All right. See you in 5.
Yep. Okay, everybody, welcome back to the second half of our Chad Dickerson event. This is the Pitch Fest section. And so for the next hour, we're going to hear from 6 different entrepreneurial teams, sometimes individual undergraduates, sometimes a pair of them, about their original business ideas. Each undergraduate will have 10 minutes for their presentation. That'll be 3 to 5 minutes of them speaking and telling us about the idea, and then 5 minutes for Chad to give feedback. I'll be holding the timer. And our first presentation, let's begin now. Hannah Hogan, COVID SMS, take it away.
Next slide, please. Hi, everyone. I'm Hannah Hogan, and today I'm going to be talking to you about COVID SMS, a streamlined and accessible text platform for COVID-19 information. Next slide, please. Research has shown that low-income communities have been and are disproportionately affected by the pandemic. As such, our goal is to address these inequities, and we start by providing low-income and vulnerable populations with the information and means to necessary resources. This led to the birth of COVID SMS, an interactive text platform that aids people in accessing information and resources. Texting is not new. However, using texting to keep people informed and connected with news and resources is. Gaps in technology literacy and phone capabilities require a user interface that is as simple and intuitive as possible, and COVID SMS provides such a platform. Next slide. We chose to use a texting platform for 3 primary reasons. 1, texting is streamlined. There's no need to download apps, make accounts, or have internet access for SMS to work. 2, texting is more accessible. Although only 54% of low-income Americans have a computer and 56% have home broadband services, 71% do have a smartphone. And 3, texting is efficient since SMS messages are opened over 95% of the time. Next slide, please. If you look on this slide, you'll see an example of the platform we created. Users can text START to 888-414-5539. By interacting with our text platform, users can keep track of local COVID statistics in their area. They can find local coronavirus testing sites, and they can get food and unemployment assistance. Our text platform works in every zip code across the United States, and it's free of charge for users. Our platform is also fully functional in Spanish. Next slide, please. This slide shows some of the organizations that we are currently partnering with. When organizations choose to partner with us, we create customized phone numbers for them. These customized phone numbers not only have the features you saw on the previous slide, but it also enables organizations to broadcast announcements and have two-way communication with users. The city of San Marino, for example, uses COVID SMS to update subscribers about local ordinances. The Family Rescue Center uses COVID SMS to broadcast announcements about food distribution and clothing drives. Our next steps are to continue forming partnerships with nonprofits who want to effectively communicate with the communities that they serve. We currently have volunteers doing outreach in the Bay Area, Los Angeles, Baltimore, Pittsburgh, and Boston. Through grants and donations, COVID SMS is able to give partnering organizations 2 months of a free trial for our product. Thank you for listening, and I will be happy to now answer any questions.
Great. So I should just get started. Yeah, great job, Hannah. I think, first of all, really good use of time. You were very much within the time limit, so I really appreciate that. That's something that a lot of people struggle with, even after 20 years working in companies. I really, really like the fact that you're using SMS, especially given the target market, which is everyone. And wanting to reach, across the digital divide, which is a really, really key issue. I think it doesn't really, obviously, and you understand this, doesn't help if only people with iPhones, for example, can get this information, especially considered the disparities in how COVID affects different communities. So I like that a lot. I like that you have real users already. That in itself is a validation. So really nice work there. I think this is really great. One of the things I've observed, especially in tech companies, and people who have really great educations in tech is there's a tendency to try to, overcomplicate things. So it's a real asset to be able to, reduce a service down to what's needed to provide the information. So I think using SMS is a super smart choice. So really nice work.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question, actually, Chad? So if you're
Sure.
Hannah and she's got this company that's already beginning to take flight, what would be the next steps if you were in her position? Should she be looking for a round of financing? Is it the kind of thing where she should be partnering with some other bigger company? What would you recommend that she do?
Yeah, so I'm totally blanking on this organization, but there are various. I noticed that there are a lot of government organizations on the customer list. There are some organizations out there that focus on providing tech, kind of nonprofit organizations, providing tech to government and kind of public service organizations. So I would take a look at those. And again, I'm sorry for blanking on the names of them, but my sense is it's more of like it's either a kind of small, like almost, quasi government service or nonprofit, or it's a very small business. Like I wouldn't necessarily pitch it to venture capital because I think it's so simple. So yeah, I would definitely keep working on it. And it sounds like you have to keep working on it because people are using it. So that's really great. But again, I like the simplicity, and I think so many people go down the path of complexity and lose track of what they're trying to do. So I think doing the simplest thing to serve people is the smartest way, and this is a great example of that.
Awesome.
Hannah, do you have any questions for Chad?
Not at this present moment.
Great. Yes,
Well,
thanks.
You got 3 minutes left if you'd like to ask more questions.
I do think I'm okay, actually, but thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Brevity
Can I
is
ask you
great.
one question, Hannah? You've done, this is great. How did you do this much while you're still a student? Can I just ask, do you have a team of people you're working with, or is it summertime, or do you even manage to do this during the semester too?
So we really started when the pandemic took off, and since everyone was home, it started among high school friends. But we realized that we were really passionate about this, so our team has expanded, and now we have students from many different universities helping us volunteer for this project because we all just are aligned in that we think this is a very good cause that we want to dedicate our time towards. We definitely have been able to take off because we had all this time in the summer where a lot of people had canceled internships and summer opportunities, and this was a good use of our time. But everyone has continued to be dedicated towards this project during the school year, and it's been really nice to see that and be a part of it.
I wonder if Cornell might be one of your locations or collaborators.
Yes.
We could certainly use something like this.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. Well, without further ado then, Hannah, thank you so much for your first presentation of COVID SMS. We will move on to the second presenter. This is Samuel with Creed. Oh, no, sorry. I'm looking at...
It's actually me,
Layla.
but if me and Samuel want to switch presentations, we can just do that real quick.
I have to say, I think Creed is next in line, Layla.
Yeah,
I'm sorry that happened.
No worries. I'm Layla Rhines, just to clarify really quick. Okay. All right, sweet. Next slide, please. 1 in 3. Oh. It's the right. Yes, good, perfect. Thank you. 1 in 3 teen girls will become pregnant before they turn 20. Every 3 seconds, a sexually transmitted infection is contracted. That is 19 million new cases each year. The United States has the highest rates of unintended pregnancy, STIs, and abortion among all developed nations. 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys are sexually abused before their 18th birthdays. LGBTQ youth are 2 to 3 times more likely to be sexually abused and commit suicide than their heterosexual peers. Our students, your children, are faced with these odds, yet only 13 states require the bare minimum of medically accurate sexual health education. Next slide, please. We tend to think of sex ed as purely biophysical, but comprehensive sexual health education, which is what we'll be talking about today, focuses on the student as a whole, how teens are affected emotionally, socially, and financially when and how they engage in sexual activity and involve themselves in romantic relationships. It strengthens their understanding, their value, and their autonomy over their bodies. As educators, we can be honest and affirming to diminish the harmful influence that negative messages and stereotypes in the media, as well as some of their friends, show them. When we continue to ignore this opportunity to provide young people with crucial, potentially life-saving material, we're sending them a very clear message. Next, please. I think there's one before that. Back real quick. Oh. 2 forward then. Sorry. Oh, it must not be there. Okay, I'm so sorry. We're sending them a very clear message. It is more important to keep you ignorant than to keep you safe. As parents watch their own children grow and gain their independence, even as I watch my own little sister grow, I know we can help provide them with the knowledge they need to thrive. Firstly, by emboldening them to challenge peer and media norms so that they can form their own educated beliefs, their own sexual health creeds. By helping them make informed decisions, which includes using their parents or other trusted adults as resources as well. Third, by decreasing the rates of unintended pregnancies, slowing the spread of STIs, and reducing the occurrence of gender-based violence. Next, by making sure they don't feel even more isolated. LGBTQ+ youth should be ensured access to unbiased and accurate information. And lastly, we empower them by showing them not only what healthy relationships and good communication looks like, but also helping them recognize relationship red flags and how to firmly assert your needs and your boundaries. I say all of this not to just list off idealized expectations, but to show how much there is to learn. My proposal will provide an integrated platform that addresses all of this. Next slide, please. With the CREED Initiative app, teens, young adults, and even parents can access scientifically accurate guidance on all aspects of a comprehensive sexual health education: consent, relationships, equality, empowerment, and discernment. Openly discussing the facts of sexual health will undoubtedly foster healthier dialogue and decisions, ultimately improving the lives of students and parents. It is my hope that creating an informative and interactive app like this will be the first step in that direction. Thank you.
Great, thank you. The slide that was missing, you covered that verbally, right?
Yeah, it was.
Okay,
I saw
cool.
it when we were flipping through. I don't know where it must have
Yeah,
gone.
that's okay. Yeah, it was barely noticeable. I was just curious. I want to make sure that you got everything. Yeah, this will like almost connect back to the earlier session where Austin and I were having the conversation. So my first thought, in a lot of ways, like my own life, I kind of grew up in 2 different worlds. Like I grew up, in North Carolina in a conservative, Southern Baptist family. And then the past 20 plus years, I've lived in the Bay Area and in New York, which are very different culturally from a place like North Carolina. So I'm instantly curious, like, how do you think about this app in environments that are more like the one I grew up in, where the adults and others around me in many cases didn't have this information themselves. And a lot of the educational systems were, in the school boards and such were, against teaching this type of material in schools. So I'm curious, like, how you would approach that, or if your target is or how you think about the target, like where you would want, people using this app and this service. Maybe it's different than what I'm thinking. I was thinking more universal, like how do you reach people who are uncomfortable talking about these topics, I guess, is a really...
Oh, there's the missing one. It ended up at the end somehow.
Okay.
But yes, no, I absolutely, completely understand what you're asking. My initial idea, my initial aim was sort of gearing it towards young adults and teens. And it would sort of be one cohesive space, so they didn't have to like Google random things and then know who knows what would show up. So this is sort of a one-stop shop of knowing it's dependable, it's got accurate information, it's easy to understand, easy to read, there could be videos on it, whatever. And so when it comes to, schools or potential educators using it, this is something I've been going back and forth a lot about, because I don't like the idea of, a young person using this behind a parent's back. But if they don't have supportive resources, then I'd rather they use this than the all-knowing and all the misconceptions on Google, essentially, right? So this would more, I feel like, be a starting place of knowing, of using the right language, of sort of fostering like a positive environment around it, so that it can start to be less scary.
Right. Yeah, I like that. So the end user would probably be, whether the parents are involved or not, it would be the young person who wants to learn more about these topics in a kind of non-judgmental space. I like that. And I mean, I certainly didn't get any of that growing up, but so I like it from that regard. And I'm also curious, like, so much, because I worked in media a lot, and a lot of media is all about like sort of who is authoritative. And so, and there, it's, people disagree on these things. So like when most people, when they see something in the New York Times, they think like this probably happened. Like the New York Times has some legitimacy. I say most people because the world's different now. Like some people think everything in the Times is not true. So I'm curious how you would establish the authority that this was information, in the same way that, someone might say, I'll listen to Dr. Fauci about COVID. Like, what is the version of that for your not to, well, some people don't listen to Dr. Fauci, but you know what I mean?
Yes.
Like, how do you establish?
They're not just going to listen to a 22-year-old saying, this is all right.
Right.
Yeah, I completely understand. So my general thought was that potentially including direct resources and connections to Planned Parenthood, I live in Pittsburgh, so UPMC, University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, connecting with local family planning centers, so that I would have those direct links. And even I've been talking with, there's a local nonprofit here in Pittsburgh called Talk, who actually was in charge of the sex ed at my own high school. And she is, I'm very close with her, and she has a lot of PhDs, postdocs that are working in fields like this. So working with them to find better connections and all that kind of stuff. Even having like an interactive bit of where people could ask questions, and then knowing like there's an OBGYN on the other end answering that for them, or, someone from the family planning center answering that for them, or something along those lines.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. And so it's you would get some of the sort of authoritative kind of reputational stuff from like partnering with organizations that have some of it. Yeah, I totally get it. Well, thanks. Do you have any questions for me? And your name, is it Leela or Layla or
Layla?
Like, Layla. Okay. Yeah. Any questions for me?
I don't think so. I think I'm too nervous to come up with any questions right now, but I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Don't be nervous.
Well, Chad, can I ask you a question? Layla, I thought your presentation was excellent. What's the difference between a website and an app? Like, Layla, you present this as an application, but I wondered, is it also just an authoritative website that people could access on their own? Yeah,
ideally, that's definitely what I would like to do for sure, is just have it be connected in that way. I know a lot of kids. I've like taught a lot of high schoolers and middle schoolers that just their parents are very vigilant over their computers. So if they needed this support somehow, that they could get it on their phone. So just having it in both spaces, I feel, adds to the accessibility, but I know that there are other platforms that, paper, it should also be. Having it in those platforms also would be even more accessible. So,
yeah.
Well, great. Thank you so much, Layla, for your presentation on Creed. And next up, so we're going to hear from Isabel and Lauren, an app called Drifter, or website. We'll hear more. Take it away, you two.
Great. Thank you. Could we have the next slide, please? So, hello, my name is Isabel.
And I'm Lauren.
And we are both design and environmental analysis seniors here at Cornell University, and we're pitching a social media startup called Drifter.
Drifter is a social media platform that connects young travelers with local residents, fostering a relationship centered around travel advice and shared interests while ensuring safer, more authentic travel experiences.
Next slide, please. So, what's the problem that got us here? Given the travel restrictions and social isolation resulting from COVID-19, we see a pent-up demand for safe travel and human connection.
With this being said, we see a more permanent trend where our target market craves a more authentic, worthwhile travel experience, and Drifter utilizes word-of-mouth recommendations that would help users avoid touristy destinations. For instance, say you're trying to go on a road trip along the northern coast of California. If you have a friend who grew up in San Francisco or somewhere else in California, you'd probably reach out to them for advice, right? Let's say that there's a way that you could have this connection anywhere, at any time, whenever you wanted to travel somewhere.
Next slide, please. So how do we know? We've done both extensive market research into our competitors and gathered information via surveys and interviews. Currently, 88% of young adults are working remotely, meaning that the youth workforce is presented with a newfound freedom to work from anywhere and explore their surroundings. Many places around the globe that depend primarily on tourism for their main income are also suffering, so we are hoping to get a way for young people to start traveling again. So we plan to launch in the United States, but our target market is young adults, generally ages 18 to 25, that enjoy traveling in the Pacific Northwest via backpacking or by van. So currently 17 million young adults are either working remotely or unemployed, which means that if we capture just 5% of this target population, that provides us with a market size of 850,000 users.
A couple of business models that we researched and looked into included travel planning aids such as TripAdvisor and Expedia, as well as socialization and dating apps such as Tinder and Bumble BFF. Technology has allowed young people to develop relationships all over the world, and we want to take this and create a platform in which we can leverage these forms of modern relationship building to connect people over shared interests, capturing a market of people who yearn to explore and have these authentic experiences.
Next slide, please. So what's the solution? Drifter is a dual-sided marketplace where users can browse hosts that will advise them using their unique local insights on where to go, what to eat, what to do, and much more. The two are paired based on similar interests, and the example we decided to mock up is of a user sorting by an interest in music and connecting with a host that's ranked music as their #1 interest as well. Our business model combines features from Instagram, Tinder, and TripAdvisor to create an easy way to browse and digest content while fostering genuine connections between users and hosts. We also use precedents from Uber and Airbnb in creating a vetting process for hosts and a safety feature for guests.
The main value adds for users are cultural immersion within the community that they are at, and increased value for cost because experiences will be directly catered to the user. Hosts, on the other side of things, will get a sense of satisfaction from helping and connecting with new people in hopes of also forming new friendships around the globe. And we also want to provide incentives for hosts to get on the app and get connecting potentially with the source of passive income provided by a company. Hosts being from the area have a unique local knowledge of hidden gems and hole-in-the-wall places, and sending their guests to these places serves to support smaller, more local businesses. The local community would also benefit from Drifter, as users would receive COVID-19 information on how to make their trip as safe as possible for themselves as well as the community that they're visiting.
Drifter, next slide, please. Drifter is a technology for offline experiences, and moving forward, we hope to build a platform that fosters meaningful, long-lasting relationships.
With Drifter, we ensure that physical distancing will not compromise the social aspect of travel. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Isabel and Lauren. So this one looks more like a sort of more of like a venture-backed startup, the kind of thing that I see where like people are pitching to like raise money. Are you thinking about raising money to build this?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
We are both designers, so we've done the mock-ups, but we are definitely in search of some money to get some engineers in there to actually build it out for us. Got it.
That's great. And so like if you were to walk into like a top venture capital firm, probably one of the first questions they would ask you, and you mentioned Airbnb before, like they would say, you know, how do you differentiate yourself from Airbnb? Like, why can't Airbnb do this?
Mm-hmm.
That was one thing that we kind of conversed about, and Airbnb was one of the models that we wanted to look at as a business model. And I think that our community is more socially, it's based more around like a socialization app, connecting the people themselves rather than the places that they are staying. So connecting community members and telling them about those hole-in-the-wall places, or more secretive, if you would, places that were probably small businesses. And so it's more of a social app rather than a housing or real estate app.
I agree. And during COVID, given Airbnb, I know there's a lot of trust issues with having a stranger inside your home and kind of the concern of having to clean, versus on Drifter, you don't necessarily have to meet up. You can really just use this person as a resource and text them or call them and really ask them about what to do. And hopefully, given the resolution of the pandemic, it'll foster real life relationships where people can meet up and go to live music events or go on a hike together. But for now, we really want to focus it on it being like a virtual experience.
Got it. And do you see, just to make sure I understand the product, would let's say that two people want to go to the Berkshires and they're two different people, travelers, would you possibly connect them to each other so that they could hang out?
Yes, I think down the road, we were hoping to create communities, but for now, for our like MVP, we want to just focus on connecting users and hosts of more like experts that have lived in certain areas for a couple years and really know a lot of like the worthwhile things to do there. Got it.
And then I'm just curious, is the domain name drifter.com? Well, it's probably not available, but does it look like something you could get?
Yeah, either that or drifterapp.com, something along those lines.
Got it.
We could work with it for sure.
Mm-hmm. And we chose to do an app because when people are traveling, they usually just have their phone, versus we would love to do a website as well, but primarily our market is
that's a really good point. That's a very good point. So I think, mobile totally makes sense. It probably doesn't even make sense to have a desktop app or website. Okay. Those are all the questions I had. Nice work. I can tell that you're designers because it looks, and this is a good thing, like it looks like a real thing. And I think that's a good place to start.
Thank you so much.
Do you two have any questions for Chad?
Yes, I have one. In terms of monetization, we have gone back and forth about advertising versus providing a passive income for hosts. And we've gone through some of the numbers of like paying a host a certain amount of money based on reviews to create kind of an internal vetting system. I know this is down the road because we want to capture users first, but in terms of fee structures or like a business model, is there any precedent that you've seen work really well? I know Facebook, Google, they use advertisements. We're hoping to stray away from that a little bit.
Right. And so when a person is traveling and they go to a place, where are they staying? Are they staying with the host or in property owned by the host?
Yeah, it would probably be somewhere recommended by the host. So it would be more like if there's like a cool Airbnb nearby, or if there's a hotel that they really recommend, it would be more word of mouth.
Got it. So the host is, because I'm trying to like get Airbnb out of my head. The host is really like a curator of local stuff.
Like a local travel agent almost.
Yeah, got it. Now I totally get it. I would think that it's a little bit tricky because you don't, as soon as you do kind of like pay for play kind of stuff, then it's almost like, I remember like I went to Thailand once and you read the guidebooks and they say, don't go to the places that people recommend because they're getting paid by the other. So like, you have to make it kind of like a legitimate choice. And I don't know like exactly what the business model would be, but I think if you did referral fee, you'd have to make sure that people weren't referring to like low quality places just because they were getting paid for it. And so I think when I think about like, this is super old, but like when Google launched AdWords, there were other search ads like in the market. It's a really long time ago. But what Google did is they put a quality score on the search. So no matter how much you paid to like get an ad on Google for like a keyword, it had to be an ad that people clicked on. And so it wasn't just pure pay for play. So maybe there's like and it's hard when you're first starting out, but maybe there's a way to do referrals, but there's also a quality component to the referral so that low quality stuff like doesn't pop up to the top just because people are making money off of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely.
Like we've all been to like a city and like there's somebody on the streets like, hey, you need to try this restaurant, and you go to the restaurant and you're like, this place is terrible. So you want to like get that out of the mix however you can.
Isabel, Lauren, thank you so much for the presentation on Grifter.
Very nice.
Thank you so much.
We'll move on to pitch number 4. This is Sync, presented by Samuel Cantor.
Good afternoon, Chad, fellow pitchers, and other members of the audience. I'm very excited to pitch my team's app, Sync. So what I found really curious was, even in Chad's talk today, we discussed music, right? And how even stuff like logic and technology has this inherent shared capacity, in the sense that both technology and music can connect each other to people. It's the process of sharing music that I think is one of the primordial purposes of music. And so could you please go to the next slide, and I'd like to talk more about my app. Sync wants to completely 180 the entire process of listening to music with your friends. The traditional party dynamic or going on a road trip is there's one guy, and that guy has his phone or her phone or whatever's phone at the front of the car, and they're picking the music. Or you have a party and there's one guy who's on aux, and that's like, honestly, for the person, it's a lot of stress because they don't know what everyone's music taste is. They don't know like what everyone likes, or if they're going to look like an idiot based on what songs they pick. And it's a really frustrating thing for college students. So my friends and I were a bit frustrated with this whole dynamic, and we were like, well, we've got so much information now. Almost all the millennials are using Spotify, and there's an API that we can just tap into. And we realized, well, what if we create this app that lets people just, QR code in, and then therefore it's democratic. They're part of the process of picking the playlist. So, could you please go to the next slide? And I'd like to. So, essentially, we envision Sync as the new way of sharing music with your friends. The idea is that we have an app that supports Android and iPhone, and people log in and QR code onto their friends' playlist, and then we have a collaborative filtering model that's being trained on millions of different playlists to find the best, most similar tracks that would be most likely to satisfy every single person's preference. So we want to find the commonality. We want to keep the peace between people on road trips. When people are playing apple juice pong with their friends, because if they're under 21, I don't know. But the whole idea is we just want to make everyone feel like they're part of the process and create music that is really reflective of the crowd. And so that essentially concludes my pitch, and I'd really welcome any feedback from Chad or anyone else.
Got it. Thanks, Samuel. So this is different from, say, like collaborative playlists on Spotify, because it looks at what each of the people contributing to the playlist kind of like, and it automatically chooses tracks. It's not like a collection of tracks that people have essentially submitted to one collaborative playlist. So
the core distinction is services like Spotify already offer, like all these AI solutions that can recommend songs to you in playlists, etc. But there's no real solution in the market right now for when you're just in a room with 5 people and you want the best playlist for all of you together. So And what we plan on doing is making the playlist adjust in live time. So if someone enters the room and swipes in or someone swipes out, the playlist changes. And there'd be different modes so that not just me on my phone can change the song, but other people who are signed in could change the song. And then you could have more restricted modes. So if it's a club, maybe people, scan in on their way into the club. And then the DJ has this huge knowledge of every, attendee's music preferences.
Got it. Cool. I think it's interesting. I mean, I would love to see like more, and this is a lot to ask for, something that's so early, but I would love to see more like screenshots and kind of like taking the viewer of the presentation like through what the experience would be like, kind of going beyond the concept into like, here's how it would actually work. You explained it, but I think putting in some slides that say like, here's Samuel at the club. Like he walks in, there's a QR reader. He checks in, like an alert goes to, 5 people in the room who he knows. And, then this happens. So I'd encourage you to do that, because I think the more you can illustrate the ideas with, screenshots or wireframes or whatever, the stronger the presentation. But I like the idea. Like, I think that making playlists, especially with a lot of people, is very difficult and painful. And like, I'm a little older than you, but like you go to a party and you can tell when people don't like the song that just came on, and it can kind of ruin the mood of a whole party.
Yeah,
so that's cool.
Exactly, Chad. I know that's the thing. We didn't do any real market analysis, but we saw what we were frustrated with as college students. Our own problems. We were like, wouldn't it be great if we had an app that could do this for us? And so that's where it was really born from. And I'm new to the whole pitching thing, so I agree. I think that the presentation is certainly lacking in details, and that's also largely because we're fairly new to develop. We've only been developing it for 4 CS majors, and I'm more in control of the back end for the similarity measurements and like the predictive playlist bit. So it's hard to graphically illustrate that because it's just a KNN algorithm.
I would. No, it's good. Like, and one of the things that, it sounds like you'll be building a startup, either this or something else. Like, one of the things that happens when you go to pitch investors is, if you're lucky, you'll only pitch like 75 different people. And the story and the presentation gets better and better and better. So it's all about repetition. And so, good luck.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Samuel, do you have any more questions for Chad?
I'm kind of curious what you think of our monetization. So right now we're thinking of potentially talking to record labels if we get a significant enough user base, and prioritizing them in the like their songs in the playlist recommendations. Do you think that's a good strategy, or do you think it's more important to have highly accurate preferences for people?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think I'm not an expert on the music industry, but I've, followed it somewhat closely. And I think I'm not saying anything too profound here, but I think that, a company like Spotify and even Apple with iTunes and everything, they've put a lot of work into the relationships with the record labels and the artist. And so I think there's so many, attorneys and deal makers, and there've been issues with rights going back, all the way to the beginning of recorded music. So I think, like, if you were to walk into a record label right now, I think it's tricky. Like, the best situation you could be in would be to have a lot of users already. So there's a little bit of like a chicken or egg problem. And I don't want to encourage anything illegal, but the early days of YouTube, essentially YouTube had a really big piracy problem, but when Google bought YouTube, they settled with all the content creators like Sony and others, and sort of legitimized YouTube and made sure the rights holders were all taken care of. So I think that what I'm trying to say there is, like, sometimes you can gain scale and build something that's really great. And when you're smaller, people don't care about the rules as much. So you might want to figure out a way that's, within the lines to try to get a lot of like interest in your app. So maybe one way to do that, I don't know enough about the technology, would be to work with Spotify, because like Spotify is already taking care of all the record label stuff. And see if there's a way to like tap into Spotify to just kind of like drive the rights part of what you're doing. Yeah,
so we need to
I could be totally wrong.
Simu, we need to pivot to our next presenter, but thank you so much for telling us about your app. And moving on to our fifth presenter, we have just two more. This is the fifth, and then we have one more after that. Josiah, this is Omniby. I want to also just say quickly an apology, Josiah, for some of the font difficulties we had in transferring it over. So those of you that are watching, please send some positive vibes to Josiah. I know he's disturbed by the font problems. But Chad, just really quickly, you've seen some font problems in presentations, I imagine, in pitch decks?
I've had font problems before. Like, I was speaking at a really, really big conference, and they converted my presentation. I walked out on stage, and like the monitors where you can see what's behind you, I couldn't see it all. And so I've been there. It happens.
Okay.
Don't worry.
All right,
Don't
all
worry,
yours.
Josiah.
Yeah, thank you. Next slide, please. Good evening, everyone. What is the number one struggle for college students? It's being busy. Imagine you're a student cranking out an overdue essay. You're gasping for time, but still need to run your errands, like getting food and groceries. Errands involving long walks or waits can drain hours from a student's day. Sure, you could get food or groceries delivered on Grubhub or Instacart, but the cost is astronomical for small orders, over 200%. Next slide. On the other hand, many students complain about rigid campus jobs. Students in need of money have been forced to avoid on-campus jobs due to the inflexible schedule. Hence, an easy and flexible income source is needed. And what's easier than making a quick buck while on your way? Next. Clearly, there are two groups of students with complementary needs, but a missing link between them. Introducing Omniby, a peer-to-peer app that connects college students to run errands for each other. Next. Imagine it's lunchtime, and John and Lisa are near Man Library, buried in work. Let's look at John's screen, A1. He asks for his favorite pho to be delivered from the terrace to Man Library, paying under $3 in fees. Jesse is standing in line at the terrace and heading to Man Library after. He uses the search feature to find students to deliver to, B1. Seeing that she earned $5.90 by delivering to John and Lisa, she taps Run Errand, B2. John is notified of the match, A2, and he can now communicate with his runner via chat, A3. At the same time, Jessie can deliver to John and Lisa with a map, B3. When she drops off the food, John is notified, A4, and he tips her for a job well done, B4. Next slide. For food deliveries, students pay one simple fee, the errand fee, of which Omniby takes 20%. Our focus on on-the-way deliveries by students rather than full-time workers allows us to charge 60% less than Grubhub or Instacart for small orders. Students come for the low prices, but they stay for the community, as our chats and social feed nurture real connections among them. Lastly, we aim to host all sorts of college errands, from food delivery to mailing packages to box storage, making Omniby a one-stop errands platform for 20 million college students across America. Our team met as managers at Cornell Venture Capital, where we advise VCs on high-potential markets for investment. We see one right here. We also bring a wide range of technical and startup expertise to propel our vision forward. Since starting in May, we have interviewed 65 students to define the market, 65 students from 20 schools to define the problem space. Acting on their needs, we have built V1 of our app and website, with beta tests starting next week. we have sealed partnerships with 5 restaurants in College Town and Ithaca, and are speaking to Cornell Dining on potential IT integrations. What's in it for our partners? Our P2P solution reduces crowds at restaurants and dining halls during COVID without eroding their profits, unlike DoorDash and Grubhub that take a 30% cut on revenue. This protects local businesses and is better for the community as a whole. Thanks for listening. We are OmniBee, and we are transforming college life, one errand, 2 students at a time.
Great. Thanks, Josiah. First of all, I didn't notice any font problems. So
that's good.
Yeah, so that's good. So I had one question. It might have been the slide before this. I think you went over this really quickly, the business model, like the financial aspect. Yeah. Could you explain that again? Like there we go. So it's 50 cents per 5-minute walk and then 15% of the food.
Yeah. So this only applies for food delivery, but it doesn't make sense for grocery delivery. What we are trying to do is that, okay, because and we talk to students from many schools, and at big schools with large campuses and large student bodies, like the problem is that for small to mid-range deliveries, like walking distance deliveries, students really don't want to pay like double the price for the food that they're paying, you know? And so we are trying to kind of tackle this market, like attract people to this market, small walking distance deliveries, which is why we are pricing 50 cents per 5-minute walk. Longer distances, people should be using Grubhub or Grubhub or DoorDash. But for shorter distances, walking distances, this makes it really attractive. Yep.
That makes sense. I mean, I think you had a really clear illustration of kind of the user experience on both sides. From I don't remember what you called each side, but the kind of the errand, the person running the errand, and then the kind of consumer side. And so that makes sense. I like the way you differentiate from the existing players like Seamless, Grubhub, et cetera, because that was like my first question, DoorDash. And it makes sense because you're talking about kind of a captive audience in a very distinct place, which is, college campuses.
Yeah.
So I think you're kind of defining a niche in the market that is being underserved. And then I also like the idea of, on the kind of supply side of the service, that you have, I think, a good sort of thesis on why college students would want to do this work. The wanting more flexibility in hours. Like, it's been a long time since I was in school, but yeah, I had a job where I had to be at a certain place from like this time to this time. And this kind of on-demand work, I think I would have really loved back then. So yeah, I mean, I think it makes a lot of sense. I really like it. I think it's like all businesses, I think it's kind of like an execution question. Like, can you move past the research and get people actually using it? And but I think you have a really kind of clear strategic direction, and the business makes sense, and I can totally see the market need. So nice work.
Thank you. Maybe, we have a question regarding execution. Yeah. You think that you're a perfect person to ask. Like this is a very network effects based platform, and it's really hard to get the kind of balance of demand and supply side working. So you kind of have any advice for that? Like, how do you get to that critical mass?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I don't know the economics, but I think that a great place to start would be search ads or Facebook ads or any types of ads. So maybe, you could do geo-targeted ads on Google, and you would see what does it cost to buy a keyword, and then, build a spreadsheet model where you have this is how much money we would make on, X number of deliveries. This is how much it costs to get a customer through ads. And you'd have to test it, quite a bit. And then just see if the math works. So if you could spend, I'm just making up numbers, but if it cost you $2 to acquire a customer, but for every customer you made $3, then you'll be in good shape. It's you just have to kind of scale the number up. But if you find that it costs you $3 to acquire a customer and you only make 25 cents, then you're basically just putting money in a garbage can and lighting it on fire. And a lot of startups have done that very successfully.
Thanks so much for that.
So yeah, I think you're at a point where you could start doing tests with search. And one last thing I would add is, and this is very much in the spirit of the SMS that we saw earlier, like I would try to test it in the simplest way possible. Like maybe, talk to 5 people who live in different places around campus and build an app that looks like it's very sophisticated, but maybe like just send someone a text and say, hey, someone wants you to run over here and get something. Don't spend, while you're testing and trying to figure out the economics work, don't spend a lot of time doing like whiz bang technology stuff. And you can do really simple stuff with email and texting and all behind the scenes.
Cool. Yeah, thanks so much for the advice.
You're welcome. Good luck.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, OmniB, for the presentation. We'll move to our final presentation of the afternoon. This is Relearn from Ryan.
All right, next slide. So, hello, everyone. And first of all, thanks to Chad, Austin, Cornell, Maya, and the whole Milstein admin team for the opportunity to talk to you all. I'm going to be telling you a little about Relearn, which I think is going to transform collaboration between classmates in large classes. Next slide. The first guiding idea behind Relearn is that every college student is searching for connection. However, the connection students form today are fickle and frequently come down to chance. Did I attend the right office hours? Did I pick the right lecture hall role? I learned this the hard way when I was knocked out of classes due to a medical issue freshman year, and realized that the foundation of many friendships I was forming had been kind of ripped out from under me just because I didn't happen to go to the right office hours anymore. Also, students are inherently collaborative creatures, but the classes with the most students often become the most solitary experiences. This is truer than ever during the COVID pandemic, when there's no chance for students to talk to each other in the lecture hall or collaborate during office hours. I built Relearn to solve this. Relearn automatically creates communities around collaboration between students in the classes they're attending. Thanks to Relearn, all students in large classes will have the opportunity to face the challenges of their classes together with other students. The second guiding idea behind Relearn came to me as I watched how the pre-med students in my dorm tried to work with the recordings that they made every day of their lectures. While studying, they waste valuable time searching through hours of lectures for a specific topic. And when they find it, they're frequently greeted with a low-quality, echoey recording filled with distracting coughs and shuffling papers. It's a really crappy experience that basically hasn't changed since the tape recorders of the 80s. For web search, Google has become so fast and accurate that it's being seen as an extension of people's own factual memories. Relearn will do the same thing for college lectures by applying crowdsourcing and bleeding-edge on-device machine learning. Next slide. Relearn is really 3 transformative tools that together are greater than the sum of their parts. First, it's a seamless, inclusive social layer above college lectures. Relearn users recording in the same room or attending the same Zoom call are automatically linked together into Relearn groups. In these groups, classmates can chat at any time to connect over common interests, answer each other's questions, post class-specific memes, and bond over shared experience. You can think like Twitch or Instagram live chat for college classes. Second, it's a first-of-its-kind collaborative study tool. Using Relearn group notes, students can collaboratively take notes Google Docs style and answer each other's questions to form a knowledge base or wiki for the class. I think that working with others in the open will result in notes that are better than anything individuals could have done themselves. Third, it's a game-changing note-taking and study aid. Relearn makes lectures searchable with completely free on-device transcription. Soon, the app will index entire semesters worth of lectures, so students can search for and relearn topics they missed or forgot about. Recordings tied to Relearn groups mean that users can always listen like they're in the front row. So coughing classmates and rustling papers will no longer ruin users' review sessions. Next slide. And the best part is, you can try it all right now. Everything you've seen so far is completely real and live right now at relearn.fyi. It's available as a native app for both iOS and Android, as well as a companion web app that supports all major web browsers. And right now, I'm not quite ready to share revenue plans with all 300 people watching this, but it will involve a completely new subscription service with a bunch of value-adding AI-powered study aid tools, as well as a peer-to-peer market to connect students to each other. And that's all for the presentation section.
Great. Thanks, Ryan. I guess my first question is how long you've been working on this, and the second question is how long has it been available in the app stores and on the web?
So how do I answer? So the concept came to me my freshman year, and I started doing a little noodling then. Like in one night I made the script that basically took an open source speech recognition project, and you could run lectures through the script to transcribe them for those pre-med friends that I mentioned before.
Yep.
But I only really started putting all of the social aspects together in the end of last year, and I worked on it all throughout the entire summer. I'm in sort of a semi-open beta right now where Cornell CS majors are invited to use it. It's available currently on TestFlight and Google's equivalent Firebase app, something or other. And I'm approved to launch it on the App Store whenever I want, but I held off on clicking the Go Live button because it limits the speed at which I can iterate, because you have to wait a week for Apple to approve your updates instead of just posting something new every single day.
Right.
So I'm planning on doing that at the beginning of next semester, and then going hard with marketing and in-person pushes to get as many people using it as possible.
Got it. And so, what positive feedback are you getting, and what just one or two things, and then maybe one or two things that are feedback for improvements that people want?
The positive feedback I've gotten is that so far people like what they're seeing in terms of the ability for people to chat with each other and collaboratively take notes. However, the criticism, which I agree with, is honest, that the transcription is just not there yet in terms of making the lectures searchable, which is a good part of why I'm not live right now, because right now the algorithm that I'm using is not resilient to noise, and that's not some sort of fundamental limitation in the ML architecture that's being used. It's just that the training data set hasn't added artificial noise or data sets that use noise. So there's still more to go there, and the criticism was, since everything's online now, recording and transcribing in person isn't all that useful, and that's why I spent the last month or so building the entire web app portion, which allows you to record Zoom calls using Chrome and Safari's built-in Windows screen recording API. And I don't mean Windows as in the operating system. I mean recording specific Windows. And so that problem is solved and will be going live in the next week or two.
Okay. Yeah, that's really cool.
Thanks.
And how do people become aware of this, other than it showing up in the App Store? But let's say that I am in a class. How would I know about this existing?
So that is partially one of the questions I wanted to ask you about, which is shoestring marketing. And basically, since I don't have $1 million to go blast at a Google ad campaign, I need to market at specific markets, and I need to saturate them as quickly as possible, because there are massive network effects for this app. And so the so far the plan has been to sort of target specific classes and go after users where they are in other social media apps. So post to Cornell Facebook groups, target specific classes for CS majors or, probably pre-meds, whoever will find it most valuable. And then basically the hope is once they experience it working at its full, force, it will sell itself and they'll want it in all their other classes.
Got it.
But how do you think would be best to, move forward in that direction once we go wide in January?
I think that's pretty smart. I mean, I think about like how Facebook started in at Harvard and then it went out to all universities. There's some steps in between. So I think like your version of kind of starting at the class level makes sense. Like if you get 1 or 2 classes at Cornell and then people like it, more classes at Cornell, it makes it easier to pitch to people at other schools. So yeah, like I think, I mean, you're already doing this. The way to try to drive interest without spending money is pretty much all social media. So, and SEO to the extent that you can look at kind of the search keyword landscape. And if you're searching for things that look like they would be search terms that would be good for here, but aren't many good websites for those search terms, then I would go after those. So like, for example, if you Google lecture notes and there aren't really any good results, then that might be an opportunity for you to do some search engine optimization work to kind of get your stuff to the top.
With that, Ryan, we're out of time, but so appreciate your presentation. And to all the Pitch Fest participants, what an amazing lineup, and congratulations for having some time with Chad. Chad, thank you so much for taking the time this afternoon, sharing us your stories of your history and your work as a coach. I want to encourage folks to go read the Jerry Colonna book, Reboot, and Chapter 2, especially the one that is about your journey specifically, Chad. And this has been fantastic. I'm so appreciative. I want to give a thanks to eCornell and specifically Chris and Owen there, and to the Milstein Program for sponsoring this, and for Chad, your work with Cornell Tech and with the Milstein Program specifically. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, Austin. You were a great host. You should be on the radio.
Thank you for saying that. Thanks to everybody who came. Chad, I'll let you go. Good luck with the piano practicing, and this has been a fun time. Please email me with your winner too, Chad. Looking forward to that.
Awesome.
We'll let the students
I will. All right. Thanks, Austin. Thanks, everyone.
Have a good evening, everybody.
Good night.
Bye-bye.